Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game SO Targeting series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, more specifically the work in progress Nintendo 64 core. And I decided to do this video because over the weekend there was a lot of news stories about the new Banjo Tooie version on NSO having some issues in the gameplay demo department, running way faster than original hardware. So I figured I would start out these NSO comparisons with Banjo Tooie. You're watching these out of order. You will see some more episodes later on in the future. But I really wanted to take a look at what was going on with the NSO implementation of software emulation with Nintendo 64 here on Banjo Tooie, because 100% these demos do run way too fast compared to the original hardware, but that really isn't surprising, and I'm going to kind of explain today why that might be. But let's go from the NSO version of the game over to MiSTer FPGA, and you'll see here as we kind of move around the screen a little bit difference of an actual screen cadence. And just so you know, this is running on the MiSTer FPGA stock core, so there's no overclocks on any of the chips getting us extra frame rates, nor is there the frame rate patch applied to this. And this introductory demo sequence is running exactly like you would expect it to on real Nintendo 64 hardware as far as the frame rate is concerned. But the question is, why is this happening? And is it really that big of a deal compared to what the internet would make it out to be? You'll see here we're going to go side by side, locked off on a different transition. MiSTer on the left, NSO on the right, and when those shoes disappear, that is where I locked the cut to. And you will see that the NSO version of the game just absolutely runs faster and gets completely ahead of the actual stock implementation. I did check this on original hardware as well. The MiSTer FPGA core did exactly the same thing as real Nintendo 64 hardware. I just didn't include the actual captures because my Nintendo 64 only does composite video, and it looked absolutely horrifying when I got it into Resolve. So you can definitely tell on the NSO side of things, Banjo Tooie is running too fast. But I guess the real question is, does that really matter to you? Obviously the gameplay demos look a little bit wonky. That is to be expected because you're getting way more frames out of the game than you ever would before, and you're going to just see that that actually executes the code faster. But if we move over to the turbo implementation on Nintendo 64 on MiSTer FPGA, we get the exact same speed that we're getting in the NSO version of the game. So basically NSO emulation of Banjo Tooie is adhering to the MiSTer FPGA turbo core, which is really interesting because it's the first time comparing turbo against the actual NSO versions of the game where we see a matchup. Now, as far as the graphics are concerned, obviously you're getting that internal rendering resolution upscale, and it is going to bring a few graphical issues here and there that you will not notice in the Nintendo 64 footage on MiSTer, and you wouldn't notice on original hardware as well. They are few and far between. They're not the most obtrusive things in the world, but they do exist, and it is kind of interesting. But there's one really big miss as far as the NSO implementation is concerned, and watch the screen because very suddenly it's actually going to get a little bit darker. That has nothing to do with the emulation, everything to do with the Switch doesn't think anything's being executed, so it's kind of trying to put itself to sleep right there, and if you're not pushing a button, it will definitely do so. So that's something Nintendo definitely needs to work out there, because that should not be happening. The Switch shouldn't be trying to go to sleep. But as far as the actual upscale is concerned, because Banjo Tooie is such a colorful game, for the most part I think it looks really nice here, and I do think a lot of people are going to enjoy it when they do actually play it. But again, there were so many different news stories about the emulation issues, I figured it would be a fun time to talk about it, because again, the NSO version of this game just does run a lot faster than a stock Nintendo 64. As we move over into that same locked off introductory cut sequence on MiSTer FPGA on the stock speed core, I would say that some of the actual image quality here, the softness, maybe do add a little bit to the overall universe of Banjo Tooie. And this is a very subjective comparison as far as what visual style you like better, so leave me a comment down below and you tell me. Do you like the internal rendering resolution upscale of NSO, or do you prefer the original rendering resolution of something like Nintendo 64 or MiSTer FPGA? Because with the recent release and the notification of the Analog 3D coming soon, a lot of people were expecting an internal 4K rendering resolution and were disappointed when they didn't get that. I thought it was very interesting. I thought most people would want the original Nintendo 64 look for nostalgia reasons alone, and I do think a lot of these graphics just benefit from that softness. But honestly, both images are good. They are both attractive to the eye. It really does come down just to that subjectivity as to what you like. But I'm going to do an audio comparison next. First, we're going to do the NSO, and then we're going to do MiSTer FPGA. So listen, see if you can hear any difference, and I'll be right back to show you more gameplay differences. Honestly, both sound good and both sound like Banjo Tooie, but I would say the MiSTer FPGA core sounds a bit better. It's got a little bit more bass. It's a little bit closer to what Nintendo 64 sounds like, and I feel like the audio on NSO has a little bit of extra reverb, but maybe it's just my imagination. As we move back over to these locked off introductory cut sequences here, kind of giving you a flavor text, for lack of a better term, of what you're going to be playing later in the game. I would say that honestly, to me, it doesn't super matter if the NSO version of the game runs these too fast, because 9 out of 10 times I'm going to play Banjo Tooie. I'm going to play it on the MiSTer FPGA Turbo Core, and I'm going to play with a 60 frame per second patch on, trying to get as many frames as I possibly can out of the game, and that's also going to cause these sequences to run fast. So basically on the NSO side of things, they're doing kind of an implementation that the MiSTer Turbo Core would do. They're allowing it more horsepower than the CPU would normally have on a stock setting, and that's when you end up with more frames in the game, which is going to give you a better experience. But as far as these sequences are concerned, they are frame rate sensitive, so if you get more frames, they just end up running faster than the real Nintendo 64 game you remembered. So I guess that really is a philosophical trade-off. Do you want more frames per second? Do you want a faster game? Or do you want more of an accuracy setting? That's something that I really can't decide for you. You need to leave me a comment down below and tell me which one you prefer. And at least if we move into some areas here in these green colors, I would say that the upscale does look nice, but again, if you pay attention to the skybox when it pops up, there's some edge handling issues, and a couple of the effects, especially the particle effects, look a little bit not quite accurate here on the NSO side of things. Definitely nothing that is going to be game breaking in any way, shape, or form. It's going to be a fun way to play Banjo Tooie, but it isn't going to be the most accurate way. But again, considering this game is quite old now, and a lot of people playing it today maybe didn't play it back in the day, it's hard to say whether or not people want that accuracy or if they want those enhancements, because I would say here the softness in the image just gives it a little bit more depth of field, a little bit more character, a little bit closer to what I remember Banjo Tooie looking like, and I do prefer that, at least personally. But with those subjective decisions, there really isn't a right or wrong answer. You kind of just need to decide for yourself what looks better to you, what looks good, and what you kind of want to run with, because there's so many different ways to articulate the image on MiSTer FPGA, and we have two different Nintendo 64 cores with two different speeds. You kind of get to decide what you want. Or you can do widescreen with the turbo core with that 60 frame per second patch, trying to get as many possible frames out of Banjo Tooie as you want. And this is definitely how I usually play the game if I want to take another look at it. Widescreen, 60 frames per second with a turbo core is just going to give you the smoothest possible experience in Banjo Tooie on quote unquote real hardware. And that's kind of what I crave out of this game. I like the original look, but honestly the original game just runs too slow for me to really get into it now. Back in the day when I first got this game, I was 100% fine with that frame rate, but as years have gone on, we've gotten a lot used to better frame rates, and holy crap, have there been a lot of years since this game came out, kind of making me feel old here. But we now play games at 60 frames per second, 120 frames per second. If you have a good powerful gaming PC, you may be playing some games above 200 to even 300 frames per second. So going back to something like the native frame rate of Banjo Tooie, especially in 2024, can just feel a little bit jarring, especially if you haven't been playing Nintendo 64 games in the intervening years. So it makes total sense to me that Nintendo on the NSO side of things kind of let it run at an uncapped frame rate. They wanted you to get the smoothest experience. But I would say, compared to the turbo core with the frame rate patch, I do still think the performance in NSO, as far as the cadence on screen, slightly suffers compared to the FPGA implementation, because it is kind of ramping that speed up and down with the frame rate. It isn't doing it as smoothly as MiSTer FPGA is doing. So if you want the smoothest experience with the original graphical look, you're definitely going to be a lot better on the FPGA side of things, in my opinion. Obviously, if you want that internal rendering resolution bump, there is only one way to play this game as far as these two are concerned. That would be on NSO. But I mean, there's obviously the re-release version on Xbox as well, which would probably be considered the definitive way to play the game. The one nice thing is there's a ton of different ways now to play Banjo Tooie, and obviously NSO is one of them. But you guys have been asking for these NSO comparisons for a long time now, and I'm finally getting around to doing them. And big thanks to Andy D for helping with the captures as well. So if you want to see other ones, leave me a comment down below. Bye bye.